I'm Lee Moore.
I'm Rob Moore.
And this is the Chinese Literature Podcast.
So we have been doing a series on toxic masculinity. And we've so far talked about 3 stories. We've got The Lord of As You Like It. We've got The Water Margin, or Shui Hu Zhuan. And then we have Jin Ping Mei, which is also translated Plum in the Golden Vase. And sort of roughly speaking, we've got sexual dominance or predation, I don't know which one you want to use, martial or physical power, and then what we might call sort of economic or governmental masculinity.
Mixed in with a lot of sexual dominance.
A whole lot of sexual dominance, yeah. Those are, I wouldn't call those canonical expressions, but they're good examples of how a lot of stories do this sort of thing. What we're going to be talking about today, though, is how does something like this mix with other elements that wouldn't seem to be toxic or overtly masculine? And bear in mind, we're using the term masculine, especially in a traditional sense here, not so much universal. But how does this mix with something that doesn't feel like either of those things, and namely Confucianism? Like when you think of a Confucian scholar, you don't really think of like Wu Song slaying a tiger, do you?
No, not at all. I just want to point something out, Rob. These are the terms that we have come up with. So we're using this concept of masculinity and toxic masculinity and using that as a lens to view these much older stories. I don't think that the writers themselves and
no one says, I'm now going to write a toxic story.
So our use of these terms is obviously anachronistic, but I think bringing that lens, that modern lens to these stories in Chinese literature is actually very helpful. And let's keep going with this. So our 4th story in this series is kind of Rob, you're making it sound like it's a mixture of both the issues of masculinity that we've been talking about, but also like how do you meld Confucianism in with that?
Because there is obviously, if you read any Chinese history culture, like pre-modern culture, Confucianism and masculinity are very much linked.
Absolutely. The 5 relationships that are there in Confucianism, women only appear in one of those relationships, and that's the husband and wife relationship.
Right. And it's always in a submissive posture. Yeah, there's no sense of equality here. But even then, you don't necessarily think of Confucianism and masculinity in a sort of martial or warrior sense.
In fact, traditionally, there are 2 kinds of men in Chinese literature. There's the bad mamma jamma with the sword, and there's the Confucian scholar. And you can't really meld them together traditionally.
Right. And in fact, when we were doing the podcast on Shui Hu Zhuan, one of the things you mentioned was that there's a sense that a lot of the novel was put together with a view to what they felt was a lack in the Chinese Empire, which is, look, our guys are just we're not waving swords, we're not pumping muscles, and we're probably going to get invaded and taken over, which eventually they were. We're not saying that proves the case is true. But the stories are put together.
Correlation is not causation, as Rob knows.
Thank you. But anyway, so the 2 aren't necessarily connected in that way. And so we're talking today about a short story, another Huaban. We've talked about a lot of Huaban because they're really fun, just in general. And it's a weird one.
It's very weird.
The English title, and it's by the very, very famous Huaban writer Feng Menglong, is called Ren the Filial Son with a Fiery Disposition Becomes a God.
And the Chinese name for that is Ren Xiaozi Lie Xing Wei Shen.
Yeah.
It's a 1620 story from from a collection that's oftentimes called Stories Old and New, Gu Jin Xiao Shuo, also oftentimes translated as Stories to Enlighten the World.
And just for reference sake, if anyone is interested in reading the story, and in fact any of the collections of Feng Menglong, Stories Old and New, a Ming Dynasty collection. You can get it through Amazon. Your libraries probably have it. It's a nice enough translation by Shu Hui Yang and Yunqin Yang. Anyway, take a look at those. But you want to break down the story for us real quick?
So as far as the story, there's a guy named Ren Gui. He's a hard worker. He leaves early in the morning, comes back late in the evening. But his wife, who he chooses, is kind of damaged goods in the terms that that people at the times would have understood it. And she's had premarital sex while Ren Gui is out working hard, bringing food home for the family. She goes out and conducts an affair with her old lover. Ren Gui finds out, and he tries to track her down and catch her, and he eventually ends up getting a bit bamboozled. There's some lights turned on and off in a latrine, and he's beaten up when he's actually trying to capture the lover. And Ren Gui gets really, really angry, and all of a sudden he goes from being this kind of cuckolded, dumb husband to being a bad mamma jamma like Wu Song. And he goes on this killing spree, killing both his wife, her lover, and the two parents who are in on it, and the family maid, who is also kind of in on it. And it's just this violent kind of Hollywood Schwarzenegger-worthy style ending with blood everywhere. He eventually gets tried for murdering not only his wife and her lover,
everybody.
So the judgment is that it's okay that he murdered his wife. This is what the court says. It's okay that he murdered his wife and her lover, but to murder everybody else was wrong, and so he gets sent to the execution stage. But then all of a sudden, before they're able to execute him, he is whisked up and he becomes a god. And yeah, there's this question about this story. Like so much is going on in this story that it's really hard to wrap your brain around.
And one of the things that I find fascinating, and one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this story is, first of all, the title talks about it being filial son. And a lot of characters you get in Huaban who end up in trouble are stupid or unfilial or something along those lines. Is Ren Gui actually any of those things? Like, he's a hardworking guy. He's taking care of his dad at home, who is blind, by the way.
He's hardworking. He is feeding his father, but he's not listening to him. So when you actually get down into the story, and this is a question I ask all of my students, is he actually filial? I don't think he is, because he leaves for work every morning and just kind of like says, "Hey, Dad, what's up? I'm out." And then he comes back. I'm paraphrasing, of course, in the parlance of our time. He comes back and he's like, "Hey, Dad, I'm back. Peace out." And there's this question that he's not really doing the filial things that a good Chinese son should be doing. Yes, he is putting rice in his father's bowl, but he's not really like doing the kind of ritualistic.
Like what? Give some example. Like what would that be?
You should just talk to your dad, I guess, first off.
Because I wasn't aware that making sure you spend time with your dad was a part of the Confucian code.
It totally is part of the Confucian.
Respecting elders is a part of the Confucian
It's an element of respect, Rob.
I don't know. It just seemed to be like passing time, hanging out. Like, "Hey, Dad, I brought this 6-pack. Let's watch MacGyver while we,
Surprisingly, Rob has apparently lots of issues with his father and doesn't like to spend time with him. He doesn't feel like that's a way to show him respect.
I just feel like it's enough. I'm paying for his food. What more does he want?
It's totally. I think it's pretty clear that Ren Gui is not being respectful. He's not being filial.
I would have to respectfully even irrespectfully disagree.
You can be irrespectfully wrong.
Well, but here's the thing. Ren Gui sort of flip-flops between opinions in this story, too.
He flip-flops between personalities.
Right, but so, for example, this comes back to the filiality thing. So, first of all, he's taking care of his dad. He's fairly poor. I mean, this is not someone who's from the moneyed classes and is just sort of doing this in his spare time. He's got to work his butt off, right? And this, which is normal. I mean, you wouldn't expect the peasant from the field to come out and make sure they spend an hour and a half talking to their dad before they go to bed. That's not a part of the code.
They have to at least say something. They have to say more than just, "Hey, peace out."
So I'm not reading in the story anywhere that it says in so many words, Ren Gui gave his dad a nod and went upstairs to his wife because who cares?
I think that's implied, though.
I don't see that it's implied, but, we can sort of maybe put in abeyance the question of whether he's definitely filial or not. The story uses the term. We both have readings of this that say yes or no, But the question, the theme of the podcast is, how does this connect to toxic masculinity? So there's really this weird flip that happens. In the first half, he's this mild-mannered shopkeeper who...
He's a cuckold who's naive. He's easily cuckolded.
Right.
he believes his wife when she says, "Oh, my cousin is
coming here every day for like 5 hours."
Yeah, and she doesn't. Rengui does not believe his father.
Right.
He puts his wife over his father, which is a no-no.
Right.
And then she actually arranges to have the cat scratch her breast a bunch and claims to Rengui that the blind father attacked her and tried to rape her. And so there's all this weird stuff going on, but then Rengui just changes completely. He goes from being a doofus, that's a technical literary
it's a technical
term there,
term, yes, indeed,
to being this vengeful, violent guy who just he takes women stepping out of bounds that they should remain in, and smites her or smotes
her. Smote is past tense.
He smites her.
Yeah,
there we go.
I guess. Anyway, but it's a weird shift that I don't think I've seen in any other story, because there's always an element of the characters and like the water margin. You know, if Wu Song were to do this, you'd go, yeah, it sounds about right. Except that Wu Song, even Wu Song, would probably not have gone ahead and killed the serving lady and the parents at the same time.
I could see Wu Song doing that. I think what Wu Song would not do is be a doofus in the beginning.
Yeah, that's true. He wouldn't just go, yeah, whatever, I guess your cousin can hang out. That's cool.
So I think what's interesting about this story, written in 1620, so we're a couple of decades after the first times that we've seen publications of Jinping Mei, is that, and you were making this point before the podcast, Rob, this is a combination of a bunch of different elements. You have kind of sort of elements from the Shui Hu Zhuan, you have elements from the Jinping Mei, and you have elements of Confucianism mixed in with elements of this, what we're calling this discourse of toxic masculinity.
So the question then is, let's just assume for the sake, I'll assume for my own self for the sake of argument, that he starts out the story a filial Confucian son. Does he drop that and then become this killer? Or is he not filial and becoming a killer makes him so filial that he gets elevated to divinity? That's a weird ending.
Yeah, I mean,
either way,
to suggest, and I don't buy that he is filial, but I see your reading, Rob, where you can suggest that maybe by murdering his wife and revenging her attack on the patriarchy, and her attack on the patriarchy is both sexual in that she's cheating on Rengui, but also in that she accuses Rengui's father of being a rapist. By Rengui avenging that attack on the patriarchy, maybe you can say he is being filial.
Or Confucian. I don't know the term, but why in the world does he get elevated to godhood at the end of the story?
I think it's all a joke. I think it's ironic, right?
It's ironic?
Yeah, I mean, it's literally Deus ex machina. Like the god is coming from the machine, and just doing these weird things. And I don't think we're supposed to believe the ending.
Or is it more like, I mean, it definitely happens in the context of the story.
Sure.
But is it more maybe a commentary on the specific society he's coming from? Like, oh, you know what God you need? This is your God. You don't have any other gods. Your God is this doofus clerk who killed a bunch of people. Yeah, that's it. He's going to be your protector because that's pretty much the best you're going to get.
Maybe
it's in any case, it is something that commentators have spent a lot of time scratching their heads about, because even the switch into violence is kind of a stretch, but you're like, all right, I can see how someone would completely lose the plot and just do this. But for that person to be whisked off to whatever the afterworld is, and then boom, here they are again, is a really strange ending. And it's hard to reconcile. And I think one of the things to really pay attention to in the story is that it doesn't seem to fit. Yeah. We talked in the beginning about how does something like these sort of hyper masculine tales fit with what does not appear to be masculine at all, or at least masculine in this sort of stereotypical sense? And maybe the answer is they don't.
I think another answer is there are kind of meanings that are hidden. that if you're not looking carefully at the original Chinese, you might not notice. So a couple of things. So Ren Gui, at the very end, he kills 5 people. And there's this very weird thing right before he goes on his rampage. He goes and asks, he goes and kills a chicken. He slits its throat, and this asking like how many people he should kill in his rampage. And so the chicken jumps 4 times, and then it climbs up the roof and jumps a 5th time. And that's how he actually determines how many people he's going to kill. And in the end, he kills 4 people, but he can't find his wife's lover. And he looks up and, oh, the lover is actually on the roof.
Ta-da!
And what's fascinating is the wife's family. Rob, do you remember what occupation they have?
Oh, yes. The Weiss family, they're umbrella sellers.
Which is strange because the word for umbrella in classical Chinese is just san. And if you go back and look at the character, it's actually 5 people with one above the 4 others. So the reference to umbrella is actually a reference to how many people. It's an inside joke. It's a reference, I think. It's an inside joke to how many people he's going to kill. And just go and take a look. Those of y'all who can speak Chinese or read Chinese characters, take a look, and you'll kind of start to get the inside jokiness and like why it's like, oh, he's got to kill one more person. It's almost
Otherwise, the character doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And this is not Lee making an interpretive jump either. These stories are loaded with inside jokes like that. This one, for example, one of the traditional terms for sexual climax is the moments of the clouds and rain, and the wife's parents are umbrella sellers, so you can start connecting the dots there, and that is all through it. I mean, all through it.
All through these stories, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
It's not just this particular story. And finally, I think one more thing I wanted to put in before we kind of start to wrap up. So this story occurs during the Southern Song Emperor Guanzong's reign. It happens in 1189, I believe. And Emperor Guanzong was known for, guess what? He was known for being cuckolded. His wife, he's famous for being dominated by his wife. His wife did not allow Emperor Guanzong to go to his dad's funeral, which is a huge Confucian
Talk about
no-no.
not filial. Holy cow.
Right. Like, this is, I think, where the concept of toxic masculinity totally connects with the concept of filial piety in the Confucian sense. The kind of implication is that men need to dominate their wives, and when they don't dominate their wives, things get out of whack in terms of how the world works. And the Tao goes haywire, in other words. And I think that kind of political reading, which is implicit in just because the story has nothing to do with the time period. This could have occurred at a bunch of different times in Chinese history. He places it, Feng Menglong places it during this period for a very specific reason. It's because he goes, as soon as we, the Ming reader, you and I, go, oh, this is happening during Guanzong's reign.
Oh, snap.
We know kind of already that it's got to do with men being dominated by women.
Right. And it's no reach. A lot of these stories do similar things. So perhaps, I mean, in addition to being sort of an allegorical reading or commentary on a particular emperor, there's a sort of, it's not a cautionary tale, but how far can these Confucian values really be extended? Because can you really keep all of them? What happens if, through maybe no fault of your own, you're thrown into a situation where you have to make some hard choices? Like, well, I'm being cuckolded. My father, for whom I have a primary responsibility as a filial son, has just been impugned, and all kinds of horrible things are happening. How do I deal with this? Well, how do you deal with that? In the Toxic Masculinity series, you slaughter a chicken, you grab your knife, and you go.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to end it, Rob. I actually have some animals I need to go slaughter.
Well, I hopefully not for the same reasons.
No comment.
Okay.
No, it's a different thing. I've got a midterm that I've got to prepare for.
Got it. That makes sense.
That's why
that's how
I'm
you
slaughtering.
determine student grades.
Yes. It's as good as way of, as any.
Any other system. Yeah, it's about the same, really.
All right, Rob. So are you going to keep your knives sheathed until the next podcast?
I will.
All right, I'll take that as a promise. I'm Lee Moore.
I'm Rob Moore.
And this is the Chinese Literature Podcast.